Welcome, everybody, to the NWSOFA Fiscal Meeting. I'm going to tell you a little bit about NWSOFA, but first of all, I'm going to tell you it does not stand for NWSOFA. It stands for Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action, and we are an indivisible chapter. We're one of 6,500 across the country. We cover 6 townships: Barrington, Palatine, Wheeling, Elk Grove, Schaumburg, and Springwood, Hanover Park. And within that area, there's about 635,000 people that live there. Our membership within that area is 5,200 members. Interesting, we started right after the 2012 election as NWSOFA. We had 17 members. So if you want to fast forward that, it had some really great growth. We work on issues across the board. We like to say that we're organized on a twin snowflake principle. We have 2 snowflakes that you'll see if you go up on our website. One is all the issues that we deal with, and there are 10 of those. And then on the other side is our communications snowflake, which is all the things that we do to promote and get the information to you today, and then to get the information that we learned today back out to you again. So just kind of going through a little bit of history. Right after we organized, the tragic shootings happened at Sandy Hook, and our first issue 2 group was formed. That's our gun violence prevention group. We've had times where we've had to refight the Affordable Care Act, and that became our second issue. And these are concurring issues, so we just kept adding new leads and new teams. Then we went through the battles on comprehensive immigration reform. Today we call that immigration reform. And then we started a time where we were very concerned about social outreach, minorities, and that has transformed into a group called Social Justice. Our next group then, back about 6 years ago, we started was called our Stand With Women group. And that covers all issues that really pertain to women, whether it, at that time was the ERA in Illinois or LGBTQ issues, or now the right to choose. And that has been one of our fastest growing groups. Tonight, we are having a meeting on fiscal and economics. Fiscal was probably the second or third group. Carl and David have been running this for the last 5 or 6 years, do a fantastic job. It's where you come to get all the information you need to have a qualified debate with people and be able to quote facts and figures, or at least to know where to go get them. We have our 2 newest groups. They're both under this umbrella called ROD, which stands for Restore Our Democracy. But that has been dealing with issues like getting money out of politics, gerrymandering, vote by mail, different ways of looking at the electoral system, etc. And then the other ROD group is dealing with voter disinformation, information at schools, information across the country on just about everything. And that has been, over the last 2 years, some of our highest attended areas. And then we have a group that has been working on getting information out to the youth, blogging to them, interviewing them. And I'm not allowed on that because I'm too old. But it's a great group. So those are our 10 issue groups. And if you're on tonight, you'll be getting occasional emails about these groups. It doesn't just happen automatically here. I like to say the secret sauce of NWSOFA is our 24 all-volunteer leads. Every one of those issue teams has 2, one has 3 leads that run a core group of between 500 and 1,000 members. If you're thinking that we must hold our meetings at Wrigley Field or Soldier Field, no. We get usually anywhere from 25 to 50 people that attend our Zooms or our in-person meetings. But we do get this information out to all 5,200. So that is the story of NWSOFA. And let me turn it back to Carl, who is the lead of the Fiscal and Economic Group.
Thank you, Bill. David and I normally talk about what's happening at the national level, but we like to occasionally deal with what's happening in the state of Illinois, where we live. Almost all of us live. I don't know if my sister's on from Ohio tonight or not. And so we've invited Mark Walker, a state representative from the 53rd District, to speak to us tonight about state of Illinois issues.
Thank you. Hopefully you all can hear me. I am Mark Walker. I'm from the 53rd District, which includes Arlington Heights, Mount Prospect, and Rolling Meadows, and a little bit of Des Plaines. Basically everything south of Euclid and north of Route 90 or the Kennedy. It has 110,000 people that I represent, and actually there are more than that in it. And I've been in office on and off since 2008. I was one of the first Democrats in this area, and often we work in partnership with OFA, and we turned the Northwest suburbs blue in the time that I've been involved. And it is really quite a remarkable turnaround, mostly led by women, but it's a much more comfortable place than it used to be. I'm going to talk about economic and fiscal matters. Everything OFA does is of interest to me, and we work together on a lot of those. But the reason I'm focusing on this is all the years I've been involved in politics in Illinois, the opponents of progressives and liberals and all people, even from the center, the opponents have always focused on bad-mouthing Illinois. And they're often wrong. They're often free with misinformation. There are many paid propagandists in our area that are associated with people that pay them, like the Ulines or the Koch brothers or whatever. Most of us know that are involved know this, and they're often wrong. So I'm going to cover some key areas and then be open to questions. One of the things a lot of people claim about Illinois is that we are not a healthy place for business and we have too high unemployment. So let's start with a couple of employment slides. The interesting thing about Illinois, and we have our cycles like everyone else, is that we actually have high employment. These are the employees in the actually 6 million employees employed. These are total non-farm payroll at a very high rate. The interesting thing is when people deal with economics, they can choose their data and tell the story either side. We actually are a state that has a high unemployment rate, not especially high. It's only 1% higher than the average in the nation, but higher than average and much higher than average employment rate. And one might question, well, why is that? And I'm not sure I know the answer, except that despite having high employment, we have more proportion of our population who is not working applying for unemployment and declaring themselves unemployed than other states do. And it may be because we have reasonable benefits for them. I'm not really sure. Why don't we go to the next one?
I would comment that I think it's, this is people talk about everyone's leaving the state, but we have more people in payroll jobs now than ever before. Right. So the people who are leaving the state are apparently mostly the retirees who aren't working, and we're getting more young people in working.
Right. The other thing relative to population is that actually our population grew. I recall reading stories about the 2020 census. We were going to be down half a million people. Actually, we're up about 200,000. So that's the kind of misinformation that goes out. This is the employment population. Again, people working for payroll.
And this is in Illinois.
In Illinois, this is.
You'll see that we're a little under 62%, about 61.8% or 85%, versus nationally we're at 60.4%.
Right. So we have a higher rate of employment than other states, and we're higher than the average. We're significantly higher than our surrounding states. So we're not doing all that badly in business. Let me add a few things. For about the past 5 years, we've had more employees join the workforce in Illinois from businesses coming in than we've had businesses leaving, which goes to Carl's point that most people who leave, and have since Carrier invented air conditioning, are leaving to go south in retirement, and for various reasons, and that's a loss of population. The other thing I would say is that we're a great, attractive state for advanced degreed students. I think we're the second most popular state for engineering advanced degrees for students to come from other states. And in a lot of the STEM areas, we're leading the country. So we obviously have a mixed story, but it's not all everyone's leaving and businesses are leaving and the environment is bad. Why don't we go on to the next one?
And I would just comment on the differential between the Illinois unemployment rate of 4.0% or 4.1% and the national rate of 3.8%. It's not a full percentage point anymore. It's less than half a percentage. And one reason people come here is they can make more money than in a lot of other states around here.
Yeah, it's interesting when we look at taxation. A lot of people will produce charts that I see that shows we pay high rate of taxes. Actually, our tax burden is not that high because we have higher incomes in families in Illinois than our surrounding states. And so when you look at the actual burden, which is what portion of your income you're paying, we're not really out of pattern. We're almost exactly in the middle. But so we have the higher average income. We have a highly trained workforce as well compared to our surrounding states and compared to most of the country. And some of that is our education system.
So you can save 1 or 2 percentage points on your taxes by moving to Indiana and lose about 10% of your income.
Well, yes. Oh, this is your chart, Carl.
Yeah, this is, and this is just total state and local spending by state. And we see that the national average is a little over 11,000 and Illinois is a little under 11,000. So despite our having relatively high incomes, our spending for state and local government is lower than average. So going back to the last one, average income in the country was about 75,000 household income, and we're at 78, so a little higher than our incomes are a little higher than average, but our state spending is a little lower.
And so when you do the calculation for burden, which is how much you pay in taxes versus how much income you have, our tax burden is significantly lower. The issue that you will hear, and I hear every day, is that we have high property taxes. And that is absolutely true. We have one of the highest property tax burdens in the country. Other sales tax and income tax, not as high and not even higher than average. But certainly property tax is. And I don't know, is that your next slide, Carl?
We'll see. We'll go to it.
Yeah. The thing that makes this challenging for us is that property taxes are entirely created, and assessed and levied at the local level. There's not a penny of property tax that goes to the state. So this is a local issue, and it makes it pretty hard to manage overall. The interesting thing and challenge for a person like me is every time I even go to a school district or a taxpayers group or something, everyone blames the state for high property taxes. And in fact, the state has nothing to do with property tax.
A little bit with the mechanisms.
One of the people that worked on reforming our property tax system from the state level such that we could change the rules by which people could levy property tax at the local level. We had a system for years where school districts, for instance, which are big taxers, always took the maximum amount allowed because they were afraid if they didn't take it, they couldn't take it in the following years. They thought like the military, or so they say. The military works. And so all of the local school districts, all of the local towns, almost all of the local library districts, everyone else takes the maximum allowed by law every year, puts it in the bank. We have some government entities with over 2 years in reserve in the bank, and yet takes the maximum again the next year with the idea that we may need it someday. And the other idea is that they turn around and blame the state. One of our high school districts did it again after I passed a law that took away the requirement that you would have to base next year's levy on previous levies. I took that requirement away so that they couldn't use it as an excuse. And the local taxing bodies all put in their announcements to their taxpayers that that law had not changed and it was still the state's fault that they took their maximum tax levy. So it makes it challenging. And we are a high property tax state. One thing that we can do to fix that is to give more money to education from the state level, and we've been increasing that over $350 billion a year. Oh my goodness, over $350 million a year, every year for about the past 5 years. So that should help with property tax. What was that previous slide?
Oh, going back to,
Yeah,
because we have the flat income tax, as you total up all the state taxes, sales tax, property tax, income tax, lowest income people pay the highest percentage of their income in combined state and local taxes, and the top earners pay the lowest percentage of their income.
Yep, exactly like the rest of the country.
So what keeps the state from making some kind of provision that would let taxpayers create their own referendum to lower the property taxes for school districts, library districts, you name it, districts?
That's already in the law.
But how many signatures does it take on a petition? You could lower that number and make it easier, I assume, or maybe it's already ridiculously easy and we don't know.
I honestly don't know how many signatures are required. It'd be a good thing to focus on. The thing about school districts that always saves them is they always position themselves that if we want to cut their funding in any way, it's hurting the children.
Yeah,
And,
they hold the kids hostage. Let's be blunt about it.
Yeah, but that's a local organizational issue. The other thing is we did change the rules on when they have to go to referendum in order to raise their tax levies, and we'll see if that has some impact. It's probably the biggest taxation issue. The other one that Carl brought up is, in fact, that we tried very hard to have a graduated income tax in the state and got defeated at the polls. The graduated income tax solves a lot of our problems by shifting the tax burden to the people that can afford it the most. Not that they would pay significantly higher burden net, but they would at least have roughly the same burden that the other quintiles of earners have. That got defeated pretty soundly at the polls. It got defeated by misinformation, primarily driven by groups from outside the state, like Americans for Prosperity. I would still vote for it, and I would still support a bill to try it again, because there's absolutely no reason in our current economic structure that we shouldn't have a graduated income tax. Almost every state, not all, but I would say roughly 70% of the states that have an income tax have a graduated income tax, and we don't. But that's one of the issues.
Quick question. I'm sorry, Representative. Can you tell me what is a graduated income tax?
Oh, it's just like the federal tax, where if you earn more money, you pay more taxes.
Got it.
You have a
You get taxed 10% on the first X dollars, and at the federal level, 10% on the first X dollars and 15% on the next dollars, and eventually you get up to the 37% or whatever the top income bracket is these days.
In Illinois, we have the same bracket for everyone, the same tax rate for everyone, which harms people at the bottom end of the economic scale.
Thanks.
So people claim we went for 30 years without a balanced budget. That's a very common claim among the right. In fact, I know that to be false because I've been tracking the budget for 30 years. We did go through some rough times where to be fair, we probably had 5 unbalanced budgets in those 30 years, 26 balanced budgets. But what we did do, we finally got serious about managing our money, holding cost increases down, and paying our bills. And this shows what happened since 2018. These are the amount of days it takes to pay the vendors that provide services to Illinois. This is actually fairly modest since 2018. It got up to 2 years at one time. That's how late we were in paying bills, and we were paying 12% late fees. Cost us hundreds of millions of dollars in late fees. That's how badly we were managed, primarily, and it got the worst of all under Blagojevich and then under Rauner. Now we're down to under 15 days in terms of paying our bills. We actually outperform most Fortune 500 companies right now in managing our accounts payable. And that is quite an accomplishment. The second thing we did is we finally, when Pritzker came in, we had a rainy day fund, which is where we put money for the rainy day. It had $25,000 in it, which is laughable. I think it's now got about $3 billion in it. And we keep adding money to the rainy day fund, so we'll have flexibility in the future. So in terms of paying bills, not taking on new debt, putting aside money in the rainy day fund, we've been doing extremely well under Pritzker and this General Assembly. The other thing that makes me laugh is when people say, "Yeah, you still don't have a balanced budget." Well, I don't know how they can justify that statement when we produce surpluses such that we can put it in a rainy day fund. Yeah, we don't have a balanced budget. We're actually producing surpluses. So we're getting close to where we should be. There are some immediate challenges that I didn't want to not cover, some of which you know. The immediate challenge is that we have tens of thousands of immigrants coming to Illinois that we did not expect. And many of these are what are technically refugees. Some of them are simply undocumented immigrants. What's happened is that Florida and Texas have been sending busloads of immigrants to us unannounced and actually dropping them off in various locations without telling us even where they're going, including the suburbs, by the tens of thousands. And that's been a drain. What we decided to do was try and figure out a way in the city and in the suburbs to support them with social services, but more importantly, to give them all Medicaid, to make healthcare accessible to them. So all of them are eligible under an emergency rule for Medicaid. The reason we chose that, besides fairness and kindness, is that if we don't invest in healthcare for all our population now, we pay for it later in emergency visits to the hospital and in general disease and bad public health. So we do that. The cost, in addition, a lot of the busloads of people that have been sent to other states are in fact taking the first amount of money they can get and buying a ticket and coming to Illinois, partly because of our services, partly because we're an immigrant-friendly city and always have been, and partly because of healthcare. So what's happened to our budget is that we budgeted roughly $280 million for this, and for the Medicaid and the other services. It looks like we may be approaching an $800 million problem that was unbudgeted. So far, we have figured out ways to barely cover it. But if it keeps going this way, we're going to have a supplemental budget. And I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do. The problem we have is it's very unpredictable. It's already, new immigrants are coming to Chicago at a rate about 4 or 5 times what anyone predicted. The other thing that is really evil about this is some of the red states are sending their immigrants to Chicago. The amount of people coming increased by almost 5 times the day after we announced we would have the Democratic convention in Chicago. And so I think there is many of the red state activists and governors want to point to Chicago as a failed city in some sort and point to our inability to handle all the people that are coming by the thousands. So that is an imminent challenge that we're working on. I have no doubt we'll solve it. The second thing that is interesting from an economic point of view is our biggest problem in this economy is lack of skilled labor, or lack of any labor. We actually have a lot of brakes on our economy right now from lack of labor. And many of these immigrants are skilled in various areas and want to work, but the federal government won't allow us to give them work permits. And they take the hardline position that if they work, they will never be eligible for green cards. And we don't want to do that to people. So I know the Attorney General and Governor Pritzker and the Congress people are all fighting with the federal government right now to allow us to give temporary work permits without punishing people for taking them and working, because we need them to work and they need to work and they need income and we need their labor. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. I know I've been fighting for it. But that is an imminent challenge we have to deal with. And the irony is we need these people. So I'm happy they're here. We just need them to be comfortable where they are and get schooling and get healthcare and get work that they can start rebuilding their families. The last thing I wanted to cover is a long-term problem that I literally spent all day working on. And that's pensions. Pensions, we have one of the richer pension systems in the country. We have a constitutional requirement that the pension benefits cannot be diminished. And that's been very broadly interpreted, including that, cost of living increases can't be lessened, that kind of thing. Healthcare that's provided to pensioners can't be lowered or costs increased. So we have some challenges in pensions. I was part of the pension reform of 2010, and every state employee hired since 2011 is on a slightly different pension system called Tier 2 than they had been before. It is a pension system that actually pays for itself. The problem is that even now, the bulk of our employees and pensioners are under Tier 1, not Tier 2. And so we've come to the point where we have to look at it again. And we'll resolve it. The good thing about this is that we tend to look at the long term. When we did that pension reform in 2010, the best actuarial forecast was that it would take roughly 23 years for us to be in good shape with pensions, meaning better than the average state and healthy. And we did that 13 years ago. And last year, actuaries told us, third-party actuaries, actually some from outside of the state, told us we were more than halfway done, which means our forecast was good, which made me chuckle, which is good. So we're halfway done with pensions. We're going to take another look at it this summer and fall. We may have to adjust some of it because some of the Tier 2 pensions really are too stingy. They take people below Social Security, which is not our intention and not legal. But besides that adjustment, we're pretty much on track to have a very healthy pension system roughly 12 years from now. Many of these things, and I'm a finance guy, we work on them for the long term, but the public wants to know what happened this year and what happens next year. To try and tell the voting public we have a 23-year plan is futile. But we have a 23-year plan, and we're 13 years into it, and it looks like it's going to be roughly 12 more years before it's all fixed. And so that's the pension challenge. So we have an imminent challenge with immigrants, an imminent challenge with Medicaid coverage, and a long-term challenge with pensions. And I'm fairly certain we'll fix it.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat that have come up, and I'll try and cover those. One was, it looks like, do other states cover more of the cost of schools than Illinois? And, is there any hope to change that so that we get more of the school funding at the state level and not at local property taxes?
Yes, some other states do, and some other states don't, but many other states do. It's because they have higher state taxes and lower local taxes. Our schools are primarily locally driven and locally managed and locally funded. Yeah. Some states not so much. We have a plan called, I forget what it's called. Oh, evidence-based funding for schools. That is another 20-year plan where we figured out what it would take to educate, on average, certain kinds of needs and certain kinds of students with certain kinds of needs. How many social workers, how many teachers, what kind of resources, and we compared that to what school districts have in their tax base. This is not a problem around here. We have the wealthiest school districts in the state, but in some parts of the state, they simply have no income at the local level to do this. So they get the bulk of the increased funding for schools right now. Over a 20-year period, that will level out, but we're almost hitting $1 billion now, more than we did 4 years ago. Every year we raise it by $350 million, but we don't see it because it's going to the poor school districts in the state. And I like that, but that is not something you'll see in your own property taxes.
Okay. Another question was, obviously we had the failed fair tax, graduated income tax constitutional amendment a few years ago. Any chance of trying that again, or?
I would like to try it again. What the chances are, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure. I think if any time we try it again, it ought to be in a period of economic growth where people feel like they're a little bit better off. Our challenge really, I think right now, is that despite all the metrics, which you'll see from the national level, people don't feel it. And it drives me nuts a little bit. I mean, I often walk door to door and talk to people, and I remember not that long ago being on streets where half the houses were in foreclosure and where people literally couldn't find work. And all of that's for the most part gone, and yet people equally complain about how horrible the economy is. You know, I could get into this. We had a terrible supply chain problem, if you recall, that really forced a lot of economic pain. That supply chain problem was primarily fixed by the Biden administration, and yet people still don't give credit for that. We have a demand side recovery. We're not used to it. Not since the 30s and 40s did we have a demand side recovery. Reaganomics always calls for a supply side recovery. We actually put money in people's pockets, they spent it, and they saved the economy in the last 3 years. I'm hoping for the long term people start feeling it and feel less desperate, but I'm not sure. I mean, I'm walking now and I walk into a house where everyone's complaining about how horrible everything is, yet everyone in the house is working and they have Ford cars in the driveway. And I'm afraid to ask, because once I did, I asked them how many televisions did they had. They had 7. So people's expectations just keep rising and keep rising, and it's always never good enough. But we'll see if people get a little perspective.
The Invest in Kids Act is scheduled to sunset this year unless it gets extended.
Right.
Question was, what's the odds it'll get extended in the fall veto session?
That's a really great question. That's a really great question, because I would have said 0 3 months ago. And now I think the governor may push for it just to remove political anxiety about it.
No, we have to tell them no.
We'll get
The
political
interesting thing
anxiety
is-
from another group if he extends it.
The interesting thing is that people are pushing for it to be renewed, claiming it's a benefit to the students. It is actually of no benefit to the students. In fact, it is a tax break for people that give to a charity that will in turn provide scholarships. When the same people could give this money to the same charity who could provide the same scholarships without an accelerated tax break beyond what you would get from the federal deduction. It's all about tax breaks for the wealthy. You could argue that it has some impact on the schools and students, but the Invest in Kids Act is a tax break program for wealthy charity. Beyond that, you'd have a tough time getting me to vote for it.
Okay. One question is Tier 2 at least as good as Social Security for the pensioners?
It
State
will be.
employees?
Tier 2, here's the problem, and I was part of the original. We knew that over time, Tier 2 may not keep up with Social Security, and that can't happen. The problem is no one could agree on what the forecast for Social Security was at the time, or what the economy would do, and which drives CPI, which drives Social Security increases. So now that it's much clearer, and we're going to have to adjust Tier 2 to be at least as good as Social Security, and that bill will hit the veto session. I'm working on it. I'm the chief sponsor.
Okay, looks like Nicole had a question about how do you account for the decrease in skilled labor? Why is that?
I wouldn't say there's a decrease in skilled labor, at least where I look. In terms of apprenticeships with the unions, in terms of technical education at high schools and community colleges, in terms of all kinds of third-party training programs, we're actually producing more students. The problem is we've had a remarkable growth in small manufacturing in Illinois in the past 5 years, really remarkable. There were a couple of quarters where we increased manufacturing in Illinois the best of any state. And we need the workers to fill those jobs. It's holding us back from the growth that we could have in manufacturing. That's the kind of skills. Other skilled labor that we're looking at that are obvious are nurses and all kinds of healthcare workers and all kinds of social helpers, especially social workers. So we have to get on. We're giving, I don't want to get into this, but we're considering relieving them of their student debt. We're considering giving scholarships for that training. We're considering giving money to schools to hire them, for instance. So that's a big need. That is skilled labor as well. So
Is that just social workers, or does that include nurses?
Oh, much nurses, yes. We're doing a little bit better because nurses and doctors from all over the country are coming here this year.
We understand why.
Especially OBGYN.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to be told what to do by the state law or what not to do.
I'm
And
sorry.
so-
I apologize. I thought that you said earlier that there was a dearth of skilled labor.
There's a dearth of skilled labor because the need is greater.
Okay.
We have all kinds of growth industries right now that doesn't have enough labor to grow as fast as they want.
There's a lot of old folks in this group that need health care, and my demands on health care are much greater than they were 20 years ago.
One of the things that we've been working on to that end, which is a scandal, is the extent to which for-profit nursing homes make money from Medicare and Medicaid and other insurances and provide less services. So that's something my partner, Senator Gillespie, is working on specifically. And that's been a scandal for some time. Some of the wealthiest people in our world, including Mr. Rauner, for instance, and Governor Scott from Florida, and DeSantis even, they made their millions in nursing homes, ripping off Medicare and Medicaid. And by ripping off, I mean they did increase the services for their patients that they were paid for by the government to provide. And so that's something we're working on now.
Question, is there any legislation at the state level for paid medical and family leave?
Well, there is. It depends on what situation. We've extended leave for working new parents, including men. We've extended paid leave for victims of crimes, especially victims of sexual assault, that was never covered before. I can't say it's comprehensively good, but we're taking it piece by piece. And I'm not an expert, so I'm sure someone else could tell you more about it.
And one comment, it seems the GOP does a better job of selling their economic lies than we do of the real economic gains that have been made. Is there a way to change that? My feeling is, as long as the folks on the right get their information from a right-wing echo chamber, it's going to be very difficult to change their perception of what's happening. I mean,
Right. I think that's right. I'm always hopeful that people will realize they're better off, as opposed to have other people establish their mindset.
Yeah, we can hope, but it's going to be a serious education program over the next 15 months between now and November 2024.
Yep. We'll be explaining to everybody how much better things are now than they were in Trump's best year, 2019. And we just asked you guys to share it and comment on it in the media, not just on your social media accounts, but comment in newspaper articles, send emails to journalists, send them to politicians, all different places. You can sometimes, I commented on a New York Times article directly to the journalist himself, as opposed to in the comment section, and he got back to me. So I mean, you can reach people. It's a lot of work, but you have the tools if you come to these meetings.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Do people have any more questions for Mark, or shall we switch over to covering the national economy?
Could I make a comment?
Sure.
Thanks so much.
Years ago, I bumped into Michelle Moosman at the grocery store, and I said, I got an idea about education, funding the schools. I said, how about you just have, like, for all the teachers in Illinois, that there's a minimum starting wage. It's across the board. And she said, well, people move to like Schaumburg and all that because they want better schools and so forth. And I said, well, the local school boards can, on referendum, can go ahead and pay their teachers more in those areas. But in order to attract teachers to say someplace like Cairo, where they don't have the tax base to pay quality teachers, that they could provide a minimum wage or salary for those teachers, across the board. Everybody across the state starting off teaching gets the same one, but their local school boards can adjust that, And if I remember right, I think she actually did come up or co-sponsored something like that, and Rauner vetoed the bill.
Right, I remember passing it, yeah.
Yeah, does that sound familiar to you at all? I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I thought we had established a minimum salary for teachers. We might have since then,
Oh, okay.
but I can look it up for you.
Is it something that maybe we could still do? I don't know. And of course, that would be paid for out of state coffers, the minimum wage thing, the minimum salary.
Well, you understand the challenges.
Yeah.
We have all kinds of needs and no one wants to pay more. And that's just natural humanity.
Well, it would mean, I guess, lower property taxes for around, because that minimum salary would be covered by the state rather than the local school boards and the local taxes, local real estate taxes.
Yeah, and then we would have to raise the state taxes.
Yeah, I don't know where they get their money
Not
from. Is
magic.
it sales tax? Is it sales tax? I don't know where they.
Mostly sales tax.
Taxes, and
and
we'll
income
have to get the fair tax passed to pay for it.
Income tax, yeah. Well, then they couldn't say that it was, that it was real estate taxes is the big burden. How do other states do it? How does some place like Arkansas pay for their schools? Their taxes, their real estate taxes are dirt cheap, and you transfer.
And their schools are awful.
That you transfer property from family member to family member, and they never pay any additional property tax. The value of the land stays the same on the books. I don't know how they do it.
I don't know
But
either.
Chuck, their schools are laughable. They're the bottom five states in educational outcomes are schools have schools that are so underfunded that's where the teachers are still making $25,000 a year. So
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, Arkansas had sort of this pretend improvement in student performance by basically holding back off of most of the fourth graders.
Yeah.
That's real helpful.
We have real challenges, but we keep working on them. And the thing to keep in mind is the more responsible people in the legislature, and there are some, actually work in 10 and 20-year segments. That we invest, just like the Safety Act, we invest in the causes of crime more than we previously invested in putting people away in cages. So just for a plug.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Mark, we appreciate you coming by this evening, taking your time.
My pleasure.
Appreciate everybody who showed up.